Greetings of the day to all. The Department of Economics conducted an online Intercollegiate presentation competition on the topic Climate Change Adaptation on 30th December 2021. I take this opportunity to congratulate the Department of Economics, the HOD and all the faculty members, especially the coordinator, Mr. Nigel Jacobi. Here are the results of the competition. First prize of cash award rupees 2000 goes to Divyanka Vaishya and Diksha Tawani of Department of Economics, the Bhopal School of Social Sciences, Bhopal, Madhya Pradesh. Second prize of cash award rupees 1500 goes to Parvati Jason of Department of Economics, Christ College Autonomous, Chalakudy, Kerala. And the third prize of cash award rupees 1000 goes to Trisha Verma and Divya Prakash Patel of Department of Economics, the Bhopal School of Social Sciences, Bhopal, Madhya Pradesh. Congratulations to all the winners and all those who participated in this competition, and all my best wishes for the future. Thank you.
Good morning. This is Divangna Vaish from the Bhopal School of Social Sciences, and we're going to present our views on the topic Climate Change Adaptation, the challenge to adapt, which I prepared in collaboration with my teammate Diksha Thawani. So, if 100 years ago from now, if someone would have asked us about the tragic effects of climate change, we would have laughed at them, the same way people laughed at Newton when he talked about gravity. But it is real now. Climate change is happening, and it is a known fact that we are probably the last generation to do something about it. So, is climate change really just about climate, or is it the everything change? Climate change's introduction on planet Earth in and as an existential crisis was made the moment its effects impeded development and threatened the sustainability of development investments. Anthropogenic climate change emerges from unsustainable socio-economic development. So, what is the current situation of climate change, and how do we know that it is real? The rising global temperatures are a major drastic effect of climate change. The average surface temperature has risen about 2.12 degrees Fahrenheit, and most of the warming occurred in the past 40 years. The years 2016 and 2020 are tied for the warmest year on record. The global shift in temperature patterns are shown in this virtual slide, in which the temperature patterns from 19th century to 2020 are shown, and its drastic effects on Earth are major. The shrinking of ice sheets in Greenland and Antarctica are a major factor influencing the climate of Earth. Warming of oceans are a major drastic effect of climate change. The ocean has absorbed much of this increased heat, with the top 100 meters of ocean showing warming of more than 0.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Glacial retreats. Glaciers are retreating almost everywhere in the world, including Himalayas, Andes, Rockies, Alaska, and Africa. The snow cover is decreasing, the sea level is rising, the global sea level rose about 8 inches in the last century, and it is even said that by 2050, probably most of the cities of Earth would be submerged underwater, such as London, Mumbai, Vienna, and whatnot. The acidification of ocean is a major drawback of climate change. The responses to climate change are twofold. They can be mitigation or adaptation. Mitigation includes the limiting of production of greenhouse gases, while adaptation is the adjustment which moderates harm or exploits beneficial opportunities. So why do we need adaptation? Because it is virtually impossible to leave the planet finite as we received it. So the least and best we can do is to seize and ease the change. Climate change is real, and international efforts to combat the emission of greenhouse gases and climate change is insufficient. So we need adaptation so that the burden of adjustment is borne by everyone. So why do we need to adapt now? Because according to a report, even if the temperature target is met, the cost of adaptation will reach 2 to 3 times the previously anticipated, that was $70 to $100 billion per year by 2050. The exact amount of warming that will occur in the coming century depends largely on the energy choices that we make now and in the next few decades. So we need to act now. In the recent climate conference that was held in Glasgow, it discussed about the fact that we need incremental progress to adapt to climate change. We need an all of government approach while putting the private sector in the driver's seat. It discussed that the timeline for climate action was and should be accelerated. Prime Minister Mr. Narendra Modi, while talking about climate change adaptation, said, and I quote, adaptation must be a key component in world's development policies. He introduced India's Panchamitra Tattva policy, which includes the fact that India will achieve the target of net zero carbon emissions by 2070, reduce carbon intensity below 45%, and fulfill 50% of energy requirements via renewable energy by 2030. This is a major effect and a step to adapt to climate change. The systematic approach and possible solutions to combat and adapt to climate change are manifold. We cannot put the same solution in every situation, as everyone has their own way. But the most frequently reported barriers to climate change adaptation relate to the institutional and social dimensions of adaptation. Therefore, a systematic starting point for answering the critical question, but how to support climate change adaptation at all levels of decision making would be sustainable development. It would reduce vulnerability to climate change and place us into an adaptable situation. The ultimate goal to adaptation can be fulfilled by raising awareness, providing political space, sharing information, strengthening technical and institutional capacities, facilitating the provision of financial and technological support, and engaging a wide range of stakeholders. We need to plan, implement, monitor, and finally assess the impacts, vulnerability, and risks of adaptation. Some of the best plausible ideas to adapt climate change is by frugal innovation, something in which India is always known for. For instance, low carbon earth and cement solution for affordable housings. Right? In a development countries, what's better than providing affordable housing with climatic health? An autonomous water efficient module for communities facing wildfires. Wildfire is one of the major effect of climate change. Commercial floating solar panels for the sea, water-free paints for interior and exterior applications. This is cherry on the cake for affordable housing. Building roads from plastic recyclables. In any country, the major waste is plastic waste. So why not use the waste to build something constructive? Converting atmospheric carbon dioxide into diamonds and carbon nanotubes. Sounds delusional, maybe, but scientists are working on it and it can turn into a reality. What who knows, 5-10 years from now, this will be a reality along with teleporting devices. So we have a single mission to protect and hand on the planet to the next generation. The president of France said it, and now everybody should be saying it. Thank you.
A warm greetings from my end. My name is Parvati Jason and I'm doing my Masters in Economics from Christ College, Chalakudy. Today I'm going to present the topic Climate Change Adaptation. Climate change is one of the most complex issues facing us today. It involves many dimensions science, economics, society, politics, and moral and ethical questions. And it is a global problem felt on local scales that will be around for decades and centuries to come. Carbon dioxide, the heat trapping greenhouse gas that has driven recent global warming, remains in the atmosphere for hundreds of years, and the planet, especially the oceans, takes a while to respond to warming. So, even if we stopped emitting all greenhouse gases today, global warming and climate change will continue to affect future generations. In this way, humanity is committed to some level of climate change. The question, how much climate change will be determined by how our emissions continue and exactly how our climate system responds to those emissions. Despite increasing awareness of climate change, our emissions of greenhouse gases continue on a persistent rise. Because we are already committed to some level of climate change, responding to climate change involves two major approaches. One is mitigation and the other is adaptation. Mitigation, it means reducing climate change. It involves reducing the flow of heat-trapping greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Adaptation, it means adapting to life in a changing climate. It involves adjusting to actual or expected future climate. Reducing carbon emissions is no longer enough to stop the impacts of climate change. Many countries are realizing it's time to start adapting to a warming world. UNEP, the United Nations Environment Programme, has assisted over 70 projects on climate change adaptation in over 50 countries, some of which are briefly mentioned as ecosystem based adaptation, which is involved in implementing projects that utilize biodiversity and ecosystem services as part of a universal adaptation strategy, and knowledge analysis and networking, in which it spreads vital adaptation knowledge through well connected global networks, such as the Global Adaptation Network. World Adaptation Science Program. It provides an interface between the adaptation research community and decision makers. National adaptation plans, in which supports countries to advance their national adaptation plan process. Access to adaptation finance. It helps governments and partners all over the world to obtain funding for climate resilience. Climate Adaptation Project List. It supports projects on ecosystem based adaptation, national adaptation plans, early warning, or climate systems, and more. Climate adaptation resources and multimedia. Producing a wide range of communication and knowledge products to improve understanding and accelerate action, including the brand new podcast, which is Resilience, the Global Adaptation Podcast. Now, let me discuss about the 26th UN Climate Conference. The Conference of the Parties COP to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, that is the UNFCCC. It is a 2-week conference that has taken place annually late fall since 1995. At its core, it is a formal negotiating session for countries to advance their climate commitments and actions, but it has also become an important forum for a wide variety of stakeholders from around the world to gather and discuss the climate crisis and solutions. It was held in Glasgow in November 2021 this time. And as you can see in the picture, there was several demonstrations outside the COP26 climate conference in Glasgow, a city in Scotland, representing the victims of the climate crisis. There have been a number of important commitments made either shortly before or during the COP26 conference this year that have resulted in modestly lower estimates of future warming under both 2030 commitments and net zero promise scenarios. These include 31 new updated NDC, that is National Determined Contributions, so NDC pledges, particularly those from Saudi Arabia and non-G20 members and China, and a new promise by India. More than 100 countries representing 70% of the global economy joined together to pledge to cut methane emissions at least 30% below 2020 levels by 2030. 23 countries, including Indonesia, Vietnam, Poland, and South Korea, have new pledges to phase out coal, and a number of countries have made additional commitments to end fossil fuel financing and deforestation. And at COP26, a remarkable achievement was the announcement from the newly established Glasgow Financial Alliance for net zero of $130 trillion of private capital to accelerate the transition to a net zero economy. This figure shows the progression of warming outcomes for 2030 commitments in 2020. In red, you can see prior to NDC updates over the past year. In orange, you can see before COP26, and with new commitments made around COP26, it's shown in yellow color. It also includes updates to 2100 temperature outcomes of net zero promises that you can see in light and dark blue color, which primarily reflect the impact of India's new net zero promise. Now, coming to the case of our country. As I said, let's see the promises made by India. At the 26th Conference of Parties, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi declared a five-fold strategy termed as Panchamrita. These 5 points include: India will get its non-fossil energy capacity to 500 gigawatt by 2030. India will meet 50% of its energy requirements from renewable energy by 2030. India will reduce the total projected carbon emissions by 1 billion tons from now onwards till 2030. By 2030, India will reduce the carbon intensity of its economy by less than 45%. So by the year 2070, India will achieve the target of net zero. The economic case for investing in climate adaptation is strong. Benefit cost ratios range from 2 is to 1 to 10 is to 1. Yet money is not flowing at the scale needed, and there is a need to shift the way investment decisions are made to account for climate risks. In this regard, the goals for climate finance for 2025 is set as per three areas in focus. That is, first, mainstream climate adaptation and resilience across decision making, in which the goal is to have a climate resilient recovery with new measures and commitments from public and private sectors. Secondly, to scale up climate adaptation and resilience finance, in which the goal is to significantly scale up climate adaptation financial flows and close the financing gap for adaptation. And the third is the innovative finance instruments, in which the goal is to facilitate the development and implementation of new finance instruments and guarantees focused on climate adaptation and resilience. Moving on, the main objective of climate finance goal of 2025. It is to promote new financial instruments and risk transfer mechanisms to mobilize both public and private investment in adaptation and stimulate a resilient recovery, ensuring that the $12 trillion planned for pandemic recovery packages are also used to increase resilience towards future climate change impacts. Discussing briefly about the climate change adaptation, let me now conclude with the words of Greta Thunberg. The climate crisis has already been solved. We already have all the facts and solutions. All we have to do is to wake up and change. Thank you.
Good morning to all. I am Divya Prakash Patel and my team partner Trisha Verma is student of Economics Honours second year at the Bhopal School of Social Sciences. Here to give presentation on climate change adaptation, global environmental impact. So to begin with, let us first know what is climate change. In simple word, climate change is an abnormal variation in climate affect parts of earth over decades of millions of years. Climate change refers to long-term shift in temperatures and weather patterns. These shifts may be natural, such as through variations in the solar cycle. People often tend to believe that climate change primarily entails higher temperatures. However, the rise in temperature is merely the beginning of the narrative. Changes in one area can influence changes in all others because the earth is a system in which everything is connected. Intense droughts, water scarcity, rising sea levels, flooding, melting polar ice, and dwindling biodiversity are now among the repercussions of climate change. So, secondly, the question arises, what is climate change adaptation? Climate adaptation refers to adjustments in ecological, social, or economic system in response to actual or expected climate stimuli and their effects or impacts. Climate change adaptation entails taking steps to mitigate the negative effects of climate change while also taking advantage of new opportunities. It entails modifying policies and behavior in response to observed or anticipated climate changes. It has been proven that well-planned early adaptation actions save money and lives later. And next, what are the examples of adaptive measures? Building flood defenses, raising the level of embankment, using scarce water resources more empathically, developing drought-tolerant crops, adopting trees, species and forestry practices vulnerable to storms and fires, adapting building codes to future climate conditions and extreme weather events. Then, what are the strategies of climate change adaptation? United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change defines it as action taken to help communities and ecosystems cope with changing climate conditions. The IPCC describes it as adjustment in natural and human systems in response to actual or expected climate stimulations or their effects, which moderates, harm, or exploit beneficial opportunities. And then, what are the ecological impacts of climate change? Ecological impact is the effect left on organisms and their environment due to actions made by humans and natural occurrences. These changes can be beneficial or adverse to the ecosystem. An example of ecological impact can be seen in the case of invasive species. Some of the most major ecological changes currently being observed, like transforming habitats, shifts in timing, rising in temperature, range shifting, spreading pests and diseases. So, at last, what ways adopted by people for climate change? Prepare for longer, more intense fire seasons, rise to the challenge of sea level rise, ensure disaster and public health plans account for more severe weather, protect farms and the food supply for climate impacts, protect air quality, prioritize climate justice, prepare for managed retreat. So, at last, guys, adaptation will be necessary to address impacts resulting from the warming, which is already unavoidable due to past emissions. Working group, I concluded that even if emissions will stabilize, now the global temperature would increase on average by a further zero point 0.6 degree by 2100. Okay, guys, thank you and have a nice day.